Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of Indiana's Education Roundtable. I want to specifically welcome all the members of this panel and our guests, especially the little ones. Thank you for joining us and reminding us what this is really all about and who it's really all about. My co-chair, Superintendent Glenda Ritz, and I thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your dedication to Indiana's kids and to Indiana's future and Indiana's schools. We are gathered here today to consider the adoption of new academic standards for math and English language arts. This path began last year in the General Assembly with the passage of House Enrolled Act 1427, requiring an evaluation of Common Core to be completed by July 1st, 2014. The law required input from the Department of Education, a fiscal analysis by the Office of Management and Budget, input from the Legislative Council, and 3 public hearings hosted by the State Board of Education. The duty for crafting these standards is an important one, and it was intentionally directed by the State Board of Education and the Department of Education into the hands of those with subject matter expertise and literally hundreds of years of classroom experience to determine what learning outcomes are most appropriate for our students. I'm pleased to report that after more than 6,000 hours of focus, including the work of 156 teachers, administrators, higher education faculty, and business representatives on evaluation teams and on the college and career ready panel, they provided this body now for consideration at this meeting final draft. Now, this evaluation process has by far been the best process that Indiana's ever undertaken in the development of standards since state law required the development of statewide academic standards in 1999. It involved more experts, more transparency than ever before, and I want to thank each and every person who was involved in that process. I believe our students will be better for it. Now, my position on this issue has been clear all along. I want our new standards to have been written by Hoosiers, for Hoosiers, and be uncommonly high. And I look forward to the discussion and analysis at this Education Roundtable to determine whether or not our state has met that criteria. With that, now let's begin. Dan, if you could please take the roll call.
Mr. Aguilera. Here. Mr. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Bland.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Representative Baining.
Here.
Mr. Brenniger.
Here.
Mr. Dwyer.
Here.
Mr. Elsner.
Present.
Mr. Hubbard.
Here.
Dr. Hughes.
Here.
Mayor Hurst. Mr. Kiley.
Here.
Senator Cruz.
Here.
Mr. Lechtenberg.
Here.
Commissioner Lovers.
Here.
Mrs. Meredith.
Here.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Here.
Mrs. Robinson.
Here.
Senator Rogers.
Here.
Mr. Sanders.
Here.
Mr. Shields.
Here.
Mr. Stanzakevich.
Here.
Mr. Tebby.
Here.
Mr. Ward.
Here.
Did I miss anyone? We have a quorum.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
On the agenda, we have two proposed resolutions. There is a third resolution that has been requested to be added to the agenda. Mr. Brenniger of the Chamber of Commerce has asked that a resolution regarding exemplary curricular and instructional materials be added to the agenda. And I think we can do that by consent. Is there any objection to adding that to the agenda? We will, if not, we will add that to the agenda after the consideration of the 2 resolutions already on the agenda.
Is there objection? Hearing none, the resolution is added to the agenda at the appropriate interval.
I did add materials to your packets this morning from what you were sent in the past couple of days. There are 4 additions to your packet. A statement from Achieve regarding the standards. I included that because they've been involved in the development of all of our standards since 1999. There are statements from 2 mathematics professors, Professor Stump from Ball State and Dr. Brock from Manchester. And then I have added the statement from the Principals Association from Dr. Bess. And then the third matter on the agenda is, in order to thoroughly complete the work regarding the standards, we may not get to the assessment item on the agenda today. The roundtable has the same authority regarding assessments that it does academic standards, and there will be a meeting in the near future to deal with that matter. In the meantime, work has begun on the possibilities of that issue, and Superintendent Ritz can explain what's being done.
Thank you. Yes, I have appointed a subcommittee of the State Board of Education to actually start the conversation of assessments. And so we have begun that, and we will have another meeting on April 28th following our next State Board of Education meeting. And so to that end, we'll be bringing back the assessments to this roundtable for consideration at a later date.
Dan?
I have a question. What assessments will you be bringing back? Are we doing sort of the
Yeah, with the passage of standards, then we will begin the process of aligning standards to a new college and career ready assessment that we must have in place in 2015-16.
Okay. Hearing no objection, the agenda has been amended. Now we'll move on to approval of the minutes. The minutes of the 20 February 2014 meeting have been sent to you for your review or included in your materials today. Are there any additions or corrections for the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes as written signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Now we'll move to reports from the chairs. Our purpose today is to consider the draft standards for math and English language standards that are before you. The Roundtable's obligation, as directed by state statute in House Enrolled Act 1427, is to not only reflect on the content of the standards, but also to determine three specific questions. Number one, if the process to develop these standards has been fully informed by Indiana educators and fully open to the public. Number two, to determine if these standards will prepare our students for the future and whether they exceed our previous standards. In a word, are they better than any standards Indiana has had before? And thirdly, will these standards prepare our students for college or the workplace in Indiana? Now, I would ask Superintendent Ritz to begin our discussion today by introducing our presenters. Now, I would ask all the members of the roundtable, hold your comments and, more importantly, your questions until after the presentations. We have allotted time for a robust and thorough discussion to answer each and every question the members of the roundtable might have about both the process and the outcome of that process that's being presented before you today. But in the interest of moving expeditiously through the presentations that we'll be seeing, we encourage you to hold your questions or comments until the four presentations are completed. Superintendent Ritz?
I'd like to introduce Danielle Shockey, Deputy Superintendent of the Indiana Department of Education, and Molly Chamberlain, Chief Assessment and Accountability Officer for the Center for Education and Career Innovation. And I believe they have a guest, and they will introduce her at a later moment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You may begin.
All right. Well, again, thank you all for having us here today. And roundtable members, thank you for having us back again to discuss the English Language Arts and Mathematics standards for Indiana. I also want to thank all of you for the time you've spent. I know from our first meeting till today, you've spent time looking at the draft standards. You've spent time reading multiple correspondences that have come to you, as well as getting feedback from your various constituency groups. And you've provided us with good input leading up to our presentation today. So for all of that, I thank you. I'd also like to recognize that in the audience today, there are a number of people who have been involved in this process. And so from the Department of Education and the State Board of Education, we'd like to thank you for the hours that you've put into this work. It's been heartfelt and at times very difficult, but I think at this moment we all feel very proud of the work we're going to present to you today. I think the voices, some of you received some correspondence from people who have been a part of our evaluation and our college and career ready panels, and I think their comments speak to the depth of this process and the passion involved in this work with regards to what we believe as Hoosiers would create the highest standards for students in Indiana. So again, I thank all of you here on the roundtable for taking everything you've received up till this moment with great sincerity. I'd also like to thank my team up here. Dr. Chamberlain and I have become very close through this work, so this has been great. And I will introduce Dr. Suji Shin a little bit later as a national expert who's joining us today, and then Sam Sneidman for the Commission of Higher Education. We are here, as the governor mentioned, because the roundtable is charged with reviewing and recommending to the State Board of Education approval of academic standards for grade levels from kindergarten through 12th grade. This statute goes on to speak that you will recommend both English language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science standards. And most recently, we just did social studies. So again, we're pleased to be back before you today. Also, as mentioned, House Enrolled Act 1427, and then later re-emphasized in Senate Bill 91, the charge before us is for the State Board of Education to adopt college and career-ready standards by July 1st, 2014. I would emphasize also that we're here today in April because we all believe very strongly that our teachers know by the end of this school year what it is they are coming back to teach in the fall. So we would hope that after today's recommendation and subsequent adoption by the State Board of Education, our teachers will know sooner than later so they might prepare their curriculum and instruction come for the fall. The goals of our presentation today will be to showcase the undeniable depths and quality in the process for which Indiana has engaged in since passage of 1427, as well as highlight the strengths in Indiana academic standards for English, math, and language arts. As mentioned, our presentation goals will be to provide responses to important themes. All of you have heard from many people in our community. You've heard great response, you've heard great question. So we hope today to answer questions that are looming, such as what makes these standards college and career ready, and then what further resources will be created to support teachers, students, and schools in the transition. At this time, I would like to further introduce Suji Shin. As the superintendent mentioned, she's here with us from California today, and she is the co-director of Research and Assessment and Standards Development Program at West Ed, as well as the assistant director of the Center on Standards and Assessment Implementation. Suji's undergraduate studies were completed at the University of Berkeley, California, and her graduate studies in policy, research, evaluation, and measurement at the University of Pennsylvania. Suji has previously worked as the Deputy Chief of Assessment and Accountability and has done standards and assessment alignment work in Nevada, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Illinois, California, and the District of Columbia. We have been thrilled to have Suji with us multiple times, both in person and in collaboration. Suji worked for 2 full days with our evaluation team, which was part of this process, as well as collaboration with us at the Department of Education and the State Board of Education staff through our process. And she's here to share with you her perspective on why she believes, again, that this was an incredibly strong process, which is garnering us with incredibly high standards for students. All right. Pass this on.
Thank you, Danielle. So I think what I wanted to start off today was maybe to reiterate my role in this process, which was really to help the Department of Education and Danielle's team focus on really the process by which they took, they reviewed the standards and began their evaluation systematically. It really was around the guidance to the department around, again, focusing on that process given my nationals perspective. I do want to reiterate here that in no way was this geared or aimed at the kind of the final decision point, but really, again, on that process piece. I'd like to take a moment here now to highlight the goals that the department worked to achieve with in the development of their evaluation system. So this process was a two-phase process in that there was an objective ratings protocol developed by which all of the evaluation teams took and reviewed each individual set of standards or each individual standard within several sets of standards in ELA and math. These were aligned, this protocol was aligned to Indiana's definition of college and career readiness, and they really focused the reviewer on evaluating each standard in language and content for clarity, rigor, and specificity. Again, focusing each one to Indiana's definition of college and career readiness. Ultimately, each standard, not as a set of standards, but each standard individually stripped of any kind of link to their origin set of standards was reviewed by grade span and content area, really looking through that vertical alignment across grade levels as well as content areas to ensure a real strength, an increase in strength and rigor, as well as a progression across the kind of complexity that we want to aim our students for in order to be truly college and career ready by the time they're leaving our grade K-12 systems. So with that, to highlight here, there were 6 objectives that the team was really looking to aim at with their development or over their final review of their standards. And it was that one, they wanted to focus on developing a set of standards that met national and internationally benchmarks for college and career readiness. They wanted to focus on a set of standards that were aligned with post-secondary educational expectations here in Indiana. They wanted to ultimately end up with the highest set of standards in the United States that still complied with federal standards to maintain the flexibility waiver. Ultimately aiming for those last 2 pieces, which was a set of standards that prepared our students here in Indiana for college and career success and maintained Indiana sovereignty, really reflecting what it is that we value in Indiana for our students. So in that first piece, meeting that national and international benchmarks for college and career readiness, we started with this foundation of nationally reviewed and internationally benchmarked standards. Each of the standards that were included here were tied very specifically and linked back to research against international and national benchmark standards in both college and career readiness. And I think that's really critical to be reminded here that this team didn't start with a blank slate and draft standards, nor did they start with a single set of standards and revise them or tailor them to meet their specific needs in wording or language, but that they really truly took a set of research-reviewed set standards that were internationally and nationally benchmarked and tied them to their specific goals of educational or career and college readiness here in Indiana. There was a critical lens of alignment, both in the expectations of higher education as well as in the needs of Indiana businessmen or businesses. Sorry. I think that second one, the second aim of aligning to post-secondary and educational expectations, we're really clear in that stakeholders from IHEs were instrumental in the standards evaluation process. This resulted in not only looking at the alignment of the new standards or the draft sets of standards to the syllabi used at our institutions of higher ed in Indiana, but in really strengthening ELA standards, especially for what they were seeing coming in and matriculating into colleges. So really tying in for the first time on a national level that process by which we measure our students' progression from K-12 into that post-secondary sphere. And I can't emphasize enough how critical that is and what an amazing leap that is to see in public education standards. So I can't commend you enough for that tie to the higher ed piece. The higher ed content leaders provided insight and alignment with not just the content expectations, so what it is that students need to be ready to be able to participate in college, college conversations and courses in ELA and mathematics, but also in the pedagogical instructional best practices that our education leaders were bringing to the table in helping shape that progression and the learning standards across grade level and subject area. Ultimately, the team aimed to exemplify the highest standards in the U.S. And I think they were able to achieve this goal by building on that foundation of previously reviewed, aligned standards that allowed for them to really focus on that rigor, clarity, and the progression of standards across grade levels. They utilize research-based practices and processes and best practices identified in the standards review process. Again, I commended this team several times in their process and the phases that they used to really ensure that they were keeping a critical and a non-biased eye as they reviewed each set of standards and tied each one back specifically to their learning goals that they identified previously for Indiana's students. There was also a goal in there of making sure they complied with federal standards to maintain the flexibility waiver, and this has resulted in college and career readiness standards that are ready to be implemented. There's a systemic approach to the implementation, support, and assessment of these standards. And again, I think as I see in your roundtable agenda items even, this discussion of bringing up resolutions that talk about the instructional materials and the support materials, a focus on assessment. This real thinking to an integrated approach to these standards is critical, and I think where we've seen a lot of states falter. And so again, really commend Indiana on the process by which they're really thinking systemically about how they go about standards review and evaluation. Finally, preparing Indiana students for college and career readiness. This definition of what level of rigor, what students were expected to know at the end of their K-12 education is really founded on this definition of college and career readiness for Indiana students. And I think that really set a very high standard, but a very critical lens by which each individual standard was able to be reviewed. Also, they really built upon this representative Indiana stakeholdership. Danielle will talk a little bit further about all the folks who were involved, but really, I saw everybody from classroom teachers to administrators to business leaders to IHE, both administrators, content experts, and pedagogical experts really coming together. And these weren't individual reviews or small group reviews, but very large reviews done comprehensively over, again, thousands of hours as we saw, as they took each set of standards and reviewed them for, again, clarity, content, rigor, in alignment to Indiana. Finally, I think, that there's the maintenance of Indiana's sovereignty in light of everything that you're doing to make sure that these standards are aligned to international and national benchmarks. And that includes, I think, the latest news that we're hearing about some of the announcements with the SAT and ACT. And that this group should feel really good and confident about their efforts, and that those announcements are mirroring a lot of what Indiana's definition of technology-enhanced, deep content-based assessment items also looks like. So the fact that they got there independently, leading to a place where this nation is going ultimately in terms of how we define true college and career readiness on not just a national level, but an international level, is critical. At the same time, being really reflective of who's your goals, mindful of what it is that our students need in the classroom, but and representative of all the different stakeholders involved in the process.
Thank you very much. And we, again, have just been fortunate to have Suji's experience and her lens from multiple states, having done this work, be a voice and be a critical friend. So asking us questions that has provided a lot of input into our process. So having someone from her perspective nationally has been very helpful to us. And I also, I guess at this point, want to also just share with you a part of a letter that was drafted to you from Achieve. So again, as we think about national perspective and people who have done this work for ELA and mathematics, a letter just came today that all of you, I believe, either have in your inbox or Dan has copied. And Michael Cohen of Achieve has said this: I want to be clear about our view. Indiana's proposed standards are strong, worthy of adoption, and should be advanced to the State Board of Education. In both English language arts and mathematics, the standards are anchored in research that identifies the knowledge and skills necessary for college and career readiness, including the research from the American Diploma Project. The draft standards are rigorous and present appropriate challenges at every grade level with a clear progression from grade to grade. They provide the focus, clarity, and specificity that teachers need to help guide effective classroom instruction. So again, we have involved as much expertise as possible into this process to strengthen our work and to be before you today to talk about our process, as well as the perspectives coming from outside Indiana. So at this time, I'd like to talk to you a little bit further about the depth of Indiana's process. Historically, when we've come before the roundtable with standards and standards draft, as we did with social studies, it was after the statutory requirements of having a technical team review, and a technical team review would have included teachers from across the state of Indiana. We would have then had public hearings on the standards, or at least public through through an online submission of feedback from teachers and stakeholders from across the state. But that was the only step typically that has happened in the past. This process this time has been multi-layered. We've had a technical team, We had advisory team, which then included, in addition to the teachers and the technical team, we incorporated other stakeholders such as parents and community members at large, administrators, curriculum and instruction leaders. We then added a layer of an evaluation team, which continued to build upon this group. And then finally, a college and career ready panel, which included institutions of 2 and 4 years from across the state, as well as business leaders and everything from medical fields, STEM initiatives, business, and service. We also included multiple perspectives, as I just mentioned. I believe these folks up here, I've mentioned them all, but again, I don't want to miss pointing out the number of people who gave input into our process. We've been purposeful in our design, and you'll see I have these listed here backwards. This is not just a reiteration of the same thing I just said, but rather I want to point out to all of you that as we've grown these teams from technical to advisory to evaluation to college and career, we made certain that individual membership stayed to link a continuity to the process. So a member of the technical team came forth and joined the advisory team. So when the advisory team said, why did you guys make this change? Or why is this edit important to clarity? Someone from the technical team could speak to their work and so forth. So ultimately, members of the College and Career Ready panel represented members of the advisory team before them, the evaluation team before them, and the technical team. So all of that has been very purposeful, and unlike, and not to put words in Suji's mouth, but unlike any other state, I think we've determined that there are things that other states will learn from our process. And finally, this process has been transparent. We've invited the public. We've invited the public to every single one of our meetings that we've had. We've streamed, when possible, all the evaluation teams, the college and career ready teams. Again, we've had people invited into our meetings. We have included ongoing updates to legislative leadership through our process, as well as keeping all of you abreast of the work as it's gone on. Again, I point all of this out to say this has never been the depth of the work, but it will be the ongoing benchmark for Indiana determining college and career ready standards at every time. As mentioned by the governor in his opening remarks, I think it's important to re-emphasize some of these points because this, again, is the strength of our process. We had over 156 educators and industry leaders and subject matter experts working on this work. We had 6,000 dedicated hours, many of them volunteer hours, from educators and college and career representatives. We had over 100 people testify at our public hearings. We had over 2,000 public comments provided on our online input. We had 7 independent reviewers. And in all of these layers of people, every single time, our evaluation teams and our college career ready teams included their input, made changes, all in the spirit of coming up with high standards that were clear and were rigorous and would allow for our students in Indiana to be college and career ready. So what did the Indiana experts do? What did they do when they came together? What did they do in those 6,000 plus hours? First of all, they started with a common understanding of the definition of college and career readiness and what is important for that to look like in Indiana. We brought together representation from the Indiana Department of Education, the Education Roundtable representatives, Commission for Higher Education, the Center for Education and Career Innovation, and the Department of Workforce Development to define what does it mean when we say college and career ready. What does that mean for Hoosiers? The definition this body came up with is that it would mean an individual has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to succeed in post-secondary education and economically viable career opportunities. Furthermore, the Indiana experts had a common understanding of what is a standard and what is a standard not. I think it's important to note a standard is not curriculum, a standard is not instruction, a standard is not a textbook adoption chosen by a local school district, but rather a standard is specifically what students should know by content area and by grade level. A standard must define content knowledge and skills for all students that are explicit, measurable, and show an increasing level of difficulty through the grades. And a standard should combine content knowledge and skills into something that's coherent and logical. As Suji mentioned during her presentation, rather than starting from scratch or a blank sheet of paper, HEA 1427 required that this process begin with an evaluation of the current adopted standards, which were the Common Core. We added 3 additional layers of evaluation to this work. So it wasn't, again, drafting from scratch or taking the Common Core standards and making edits or changes, but rather peeling back the onion even further. So what the evaluation teams and the college and career ready teams did was evaluate 4 independent sets of mathematics standards, 3 independent sets of English language arts standards. They did that evaluation by looking at the Indiana Academic Standards of 2000 and 2009 for math, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics standards, and the current standards that were the Common Core at the time. They also then reviewed 3 individual sets of standards for language arts: the Indiana Academic Standards from 2006, the National Council of Teachers of English Language Arts, and the Common Core standards that again were the current adopted standards in 2010. So through this process, they first looked at them by skill, and then they looked at them origin-free. And what that means is when they had before them all the content standards in 4th grade for, let's say, mathematical computation, the evaluation teams in the college and career ready panels didn't know the origin. So they were looking at them through the lens of this. What are the universal knowledge, skills, and abilities that Indiana's students should know and be able to do in order to be college and career ready? They further looked at the standards to make sure they were clear, to make sure the individual standards had high rigor, to make sure the individual standards were specific but not too prescriptive, as well as that they had progressed properly through grade levels. So the grade level progression was clear. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Molly Chamberlain, the Chief Assessment and Accountability Officer who works with the Center for Education and Innovation, and she's going to take you a little deeper into the weeds, into this process that I just kind of kicked off for you.
So just quickly reiterate that our Indiana experts on the evaluation and college and career ready panels represented a cross-section of Hoosiers, K-12 educators from all regions of Indiana, urban, rural, suburban districts, large and small districts, higher education experts representing Ball State, IU Bloomington, IUPUI, Indiana, IPFW, that's easier to say that way, Purdue West Lafayette, Indiana State, University of Southern Indiana, Vincennes, Manchester University, University of Indianapolis, Valparaiso, and ITT Tech. So some public, private, and proprietary institutions, as well as global leaders in business representing fields such as medical, industry, STEM, business, and service. So quite a wide cross-section of Hoosiers. The Indiana experts, some of their qualifications, as the governor said, over 447 years of classroom experience. There were also individuals with administrative experience working as curriculum and instruction specialists, literacy and math coaches. There were over 800 educators that provided public comment, and the Indiana Higher Education and Workforce represented doctorates in rhetoric and composition, English, English literature, language education, physics, biomedical and electrical engineering, C&I, Ed Psych. I'm an Ed Psych graduate myself, so yay, Ed Psych. Elementary education, mathematics education, and also master's degrees in rhetoric and composition, mathematics, chemistry, and computer science. So quite a wide representation. One thing to note, before I give you some very specific examples of the evolution of a standard, it's important to note that each team built on the other. So the advisory team built on the work of the technical team, the evaluation teams built on the work of the technical and advisory teams, the CCR panels built on the work of the teams before them, and all of it also incorporated the public comment and the evaluator reviews. So going into the weeds of the process, what I'd actually like to do is walk you through an example of a mathematics standard as well as an English language arts standard. So first in the process, the technical and advisory teams did reviews of Indiana's current standards, which were the Common Core standards. They provided input on those standards. The next step went to the evaluation team, and Danielle's already talked in detail about the sets of standards that were reviewed by the evaluation team. After the evaluation team went through their review, then the content specialists at the Department of Education worked on articulation. And articulation is so important. That's when you're looking at the grade level progressions, making sure that at 5th grade, we're not introducing a skill that we've actually not built up through kindergarten through 4th grade. After that work, there were public comments, over 2,000 public comments, comments at public hearings, external review. All of that came back again to the evaluation teams who went through another iteration of the standards. That came back to the content specialists at the department for some additional external review as well, which then went to the college and career panel. The college and career panel provided some excellent input on when they are sitting in their classrooms, when they're teaching intro rhetoric and composition to freshmen, what skills do these students need, and where do we have gaps in the Indiana academic standards? At Eli Lilly, if someone from Lilly were going to hire a person to come work for them, what would they be looking at, 12th grade all the way down to kindergarten? So I'd like to actually walk you through the birth of a mathematics standard. In 4th grade, data analysis. It was actually identified by the technical and advisory teams that the adopted Indiana academic standards at the 2010 standards, which were Common Core, were actually pretty weak in the data analysis area. So with that recommendation in mind, the evaluation teams looked at NCTM, Indiana Standards of 2000, 2009, and also the Common Core. Here is phase 1 of the evolution of a mathematics standard. So the evaluation team identified these 3 sets of skills as important for students to know and be able to do in the area of data analysis. The first comes from National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and there's several bullets there, 4 bullets, and then kind of a main standard. One thing I should note for NCTM, which is going to be important as we talk about the evolution of this standard, is NCTM actually covers a grade span, so it was grades 3 through 5 in the span. The team also identified 2 Indiana academic standards in the area of data analysis that were skills necessary for students to be college and career ready. After going through the first iteration, coming to the next iteration, and recognizing some of the public comment around redundancy, mile wide, inch deep, also recognizing grade level appropriateness, the team decided to eliminate line graphs and move line graphs up to 5th grade. So the NCTM standard, again, remember, it's grades 3 through 5. So with public comment, comment from educators, and comments from the evaluation team, they determined that line graphs are actually more appropriate for 5th grade. But that's not all. It went through another phase. So additional national evaluator review, additional work by the evaluation team, looking again at that grade level progression and input from the college and career ready panel. It was determined that making predictions about data is actually a 5th grade skill, and recognizing differences in categorical and numerical data is maybe a bit difficult to introduce to 4th graders. It takes away a little bit of focus. So up to the final version of the standard that went through all of these layers is a 4th grader in the area of data analysis should know and be able to formulate questions that can be addressed with data, use observations, surveys, and experiments to collect, represent, and interpret data, and use tables, line plots, and bar graphs. So this is actually fairly aligned with some of the skills and concepts of the NCTM standards, as well as 2 of the skills that were identified in Indiana Academic of old. And here's an example of an English language arts standard, the birth of an English language arts standard. Again, 2 standards that were identified by the evaluation team as being examples of what students need to know and be able to do in the area of literature. At the 8th grade level, analyze a work of literature to show how it reflects heritage, traditions, and attitudes and beliefs of the author. This is an Indiana academic standard. As well as analyzing a point of view or cultural experience in a work of literature from outside the United States. That is a Common Core standard, which is actually a 9th, 10th grade Common Core standard. After it went through the public comment, as well as some of the articulation work, that grade level progression that was done by the content specialist, first, one of the very common comments we got from public comment is, oh, there's too many standards. You need to figure out a way to condense some of these skills. The second, in these particular standards, it was identified that in the Indiana academic standard, limiting that skill to the heritage, traditions, and attitudes of the author only is actually limiting the ability to really look at the literature, because it could be of a character, it could be actually of the narrator. So after it went through discussion from the evaluation team, from the college and career ready panel, the standard was consolidated to say that analyze a particular point of view or cultural experience in a work of world literature, considering how it reflects heritage, traditions, attitudes, and beliefs. So it actually combined 2 sets of standards In fact, it moved language from a standard that was identified as a 9th and 10th grade skill in Common Core, moved it down to 8th grade, made it a little bit more rigorous by taking out the language in the Indiana Academic Standard about just reflecting the beliefs and heritage cultures of the author. And in fact, this also helped the specificity of the standard by making it a little bit more clear what students are expected to know and be able to do. So this is an example, quick examples of the birth of a mathematics standard and the birth of an English language arts standard. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Danielle, who's going to walk through some next steps.
And we're on the home stretch. Our goal is to finish this presentation by 3:05, giving lots of time for question and answers from all of you. So a few additional strengths to note of our process that were not already captured. So I think maybe you've heard through Molly and I and Suji, and I don't know that we can emphasize and say this enough, that every single person on the evaluation team and the College and Career Ready team evaluated every source standard. That means, again, when we say source standard, that means they looked at the Indiana Academic of 2000 and 2009, and they looked at every single one of them for clarity, rigor, and was this a skill that students in Indiana should know and be able to do? Or do we need to put it in a different grade level? Do we need to make it more clear, more precise? But they did that for all 4 sets in mathematics and all 4 sets in English language arts. Another strength to our process that we'd like to point out to you is the inclusion of strong ELA. There's content, something called content standards included in the final draft you saw, which means that there are English language arts standards for content teachers in social studies and science. So if I'm teaching science, it is important that I teach students how to read for research purposes. That's a reading skill, a literacy skill, but it's also very important for a science teacher to know how to help support their students in their science classroom. So part of the work was that the evaluation team and the College and Career Ready panel did an evaluation of what we call content standards for science and social studies and literacy. We also included media literacy standards, again, in states that are, have standards that are deemed high. This is an inclusion in their standards. It existed in the Indiana Academic Standards of old, didn't exist in its own in Common Core, so rather through all of our work and our input, media literacy standards are now standalone in the draft before you. Another strength of our process would be the fact that there's individual math course standards. If you've been on the roundtable for a number of years and you've been a part of math before, you will know the standards brought before you ended with Algebra 2. For the first time, the draft standards you have before you and the draft standards that went to the College and Career Ready panel and the evaluation panel include specific courses for pre-calc, calculus, finite, probability statistics, and trigonometry. So again, this is an even, we believe, stronger emphasis on higher level mathematics, and they have also been vetted through college and career representation. So they are saying to us, wow, if students came to us with this knowledge, if this is their course that they chose to take, this would certainly prepare them for college and career. Another incredibly exciting part of this work is we looked at the course transfer library, which is basically Sam could speak to this a little bit more fully, or Commissioner Lubbers when the time comes if you have questions around this, but there's a transfer library. So if a student in high school takes certain courses, higher ed institutions can recognize their coursework and give them credit. We, for the first time in this process, the College and Career Ready panel looked at the syllabi of those courses and made sure that if a student is receiving credit, let's say for English literature, they are linking it to the expectations of the higher ed institution. So that was another part of our process that we believe was very important. And then finally, because this idea of college and career readiness, how do you quantify this? How will the Department of Education, the superintendent, and Commissioner Lubbers say to the United States Department of Education, yes, these are deemed college and career ready. This is Indiana's process and we stand behind it. How we quantified that or qualified that is by every single person who sat on the College and Career Ready panel. They signed off on the standards for which they worked, deeming them, in their opinion, their expert opinion, to be college and career ready. So we're very proud to say that for those members on the standards for which they worked in and where they felt they had expertise, we had 100% agreement in this work that these are college and career ready for Indiana. So next steps, this is really important, and I think for everybody in the room who's in this audience sitting as a parent or as an educator, you want to know what's going to happen next, how we're going to support this transition. And I'm here before you to say that every time standards are adopted, whether science, social studies, mathematics, or English language arts, or second language learning standards, it's the department's responsibility, and we take it very seriously, to support the field. When the field tells us we need professional development, we get a team of teachers or experts from the department to go and support them in that training. So what we plan to do for our implementation after this adoption will be to work on glossaries of terms. There are certain terms within the mathematics standards that need some further explanation, and from our experts in the field and our experts at higher ed and our expert reviewers, we heard that these glossaries are great supplemental materials that will need to be developed. We also know that we want to create reading exemplar lists. We want to reach out to the field of experts in second grade classrooms and say, when you're teaching fairy tale, what are some of the best fairy tales that you've used for lesson planning? And we want to include exemplar text lists on the Department of Education website for local school districts to choose from if they decide to reach out to our resources. We want to include rubrics that support the transition. Right now, you've heard from educators that they've adopted textbooks, they've adopted materials that support the adoption of the standards from 2010. We are going to create rubrics that help them look at their materials and look at their textbooks and say, okay, if your materials have this, will they align to the new standards before you? And if not, how can we help you? We're also going to reach out. We issued a survey, and this is pretty exciting to us. And much like this work, I can tell you educators are highly invested, and this is another example of how. Last Monday, when we released this draft set of standards on our website and the State Board website, we also linked it to a survey. We have had 929 responses in 1 week from educators and principals from across the state of Indiana who have said, with this transition, here's what we need most. The top 3 answers are model content frameworks, online communities for teachers to get online and collaborate with one another and share lessons and ideas for this transition. And then third most responded answer was professional development from the Department of Education specialists and authorized partners. So again, we are taking this implementation step incredibly serious, and so from those responses, we will build our priorities for how to support teachers after this adoption. We also are going to be very clear in our communication to stakeholder needs. We've heard very clearly that parents, students, and community members at large need different supports with this adoption. They need to understand the difference between a standard and a curriculum and instruction. They need to understand the difference between a Department of Education decision and a locally created or a locally adopted material or lesson plan. So we will continue to support all of those groups in our implementation. With that, we are at the end of our formal presentation, and we are now going to open it up to questions and answers. And of course,
Actually,
okay, absolutely.
Actually, we think we're going to bring the resolution forward and then go ahead and have questions and answers, if you don't mind, as discussion.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the members of the roundtable, you've received 2 resolutions regarding Indiana academic standards for English language arts and mathematics. I move that it be resolved that the Education Roundtable recommend that the State Board of Education adopt the proposed Indiana academic standards for English language arts 2014. Second?
Second.
I also move that it be resolved that the Education Roundtable recommend that the State Board of Education adopt the proposed Indiana academic standards for mathematics 2014.
Second.
Now we will have discussion and questions.
Do you want to make your opening?
Um,
I'll make mine.
Yeah, I think I will. I have prepared a little statement to actually talk about. Before actually going forward with our discussion, I really want to say that as a teacher, I have always trusted Indiana educators to design the best standards for our students. They have always been mindful of the changes needed to meet the future needs of our children, always improving upon previous standards. Standards are about what our children need to know and be able to do. And as we shift to college and career-ready standards, needing our students to be more fully engaged in critical thinking, analysis, research, inquiry, and problem-solving, I am once again proud of Indiana's educators' finest work on our new standards. Members of the Roundtable, I do appreciate your involvement in this process and know that many of you have been involved from the very beginning, either as individuals or representatives of your constituency groups. Governor?
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz, and thank you to all of those who made the standards presentation and process comments today. We look forward to a very thorough discussion and questions, and but wish to commend you not only on today's presentation, but on the enormous volume of work represented over the past several months in the work that you just described. The chair is going to make a few comments about where we're at, and then we'll move into questions, but bear with me while I share with you a little bit of context. As the first state to withdraw from Common Core, I believe Indiana had a unique responsibility to create new high standards in an open and serious process that would serve our kids and strengthen our schools. I have long believed that education is a state and local function, and that decisions about our schools should be made closest to the parents and the communities that depend upon them. It was for that reason that I strongly supported efforts to have Indiana withdraw from national education standards and engage in this unprecedented and comprehensive process to rewrite Hoosier standards. Now, let me say I'm genuinely grateful to every Hoosier, parents and educators, some of whom are with us here today, who knew that Indiana could do better than Common Core and insisted that we take steps that have brought us to this important moment. Now, let me speak from my heart for a moment. Drafting standards for schools in Indiana has never been easy. In years past, Indiana standards have predominantly been crafted by outside experts. At other times, it included the outright adoption of national standards, which brought us to this moment today. The Indiana standards that are before the Education Roundtable today, I believe, were crafted the Indiana way. Through an unprecedented, open process that engaged more than 150 educators and academics who contributed more than 6,000 hours to their development. I'm especially grateful to hundreds of classroom teachers and thousands of citizens who contributed their comments online and attended public forums to discuss the development of these new standards. Clearly, these standards were written by Hoosiers and for Hoosiers. The standards before us today are also uncommonly high. While previous Indiana academic standards were used heavily in the development of these standards, those that would have us return to prior Indiana standards ought to know that it was clear to us from the start that we could do better than we'd done before. When the prior academic standards were in place, an unacceptably high number of Indiana's high school students required remediation on enrollment in college. That's a fact not widely known. And while previous standards included standards for algebra, algebra 2, and geometry, these new Indiana standards before the Education Roundtable today also include standards for trigonometry, finite math, probability and statistics, pre-calculus, and calculus, all of them for the first time ever. Now, I know that some evaluators from outside our state have criticized these new academic standards, and that's their right. But for my part, I trust Hoosiers. I trust our teachers. I trust our teachers and our professors and our business leaders who've worked in good faith to craft standards that will serve to guide our schools and challenge our children. And let me say, I reject the notion that our experts at Purdue University, Indiana University, Ball State, Manchester, Hanover, or other institutions across the state don't have the expertise to review standards that will be offered in our schools. I'm a strong advocate of federalism and state and local control of schools. And I have always believed that Hoosier educators, academics, and business leaders are perfectly capable of designing standards of the highest magnitude for our children and families. And I say, with great respect, to those who would have preferred that we deferred more to out-of-state experts from our nation's capital to the East Coast to the West Coast, I ask, isn't that the kind of elitist thinking that got us Common Core in the first place? I expressed my position on this from the outset. I wanted us to work through an honest process with real integrity, where we could write new standards that would serve our kids for generations, that would be written by Hoosiers and for Hoosiers, and be uncommonly high. And I want to say to all the members of the Education Roundtable and all those looking on, after a careful review of this process and the outcome, I believe Indiana has accomplished this task. And I'll urge the Education Roundtable to forward these new economic standards to the State Board of Education for approval. With that, let me reiterate the superintendent's expressions of appreciation to all the members of the roundtable. I know all of you have been intimately involved in this process, and today it will fall upon you to make a decision that will affect Hoosier children and families and schools. And I know you wear that responsibility with great seriousness. And, but I, for my part, as your governor, appreciate your dedication to the families of Indiana, your commitment to review these materials in a thoughtful way. I look very much forward to the questions and the discussions and the comments that will follow, and all the time that we need as we consider the resolutions that are before the Education Roundtable today. With that, the floor is open. The chair will keep a queue, and you can slide your hand in the air, and if we don't see you, slip us a note. Teresa Lovers.
Thank you, Governor. As one of probably three here, maybe more, Senator Rogers and Representative Boehning and I, who have been a part of the roundtable for more years than I can remember, having been through the standards process many times and now wearing a different hat at the Commission for Higher Education, I can tell you that this is the first time that I can recall that higher education has been involved in the development and the approval of the standards. To be able to say, during that period of time, will this ensure that students are college and career ready, as opposed to having them show up at the doors of our colleges and universities or moving into a career with high needs as well, not prepared. We currently, Governor, you made reference to this, we currently have about 70% of our students who start at our community college in need of remediation when they arrive. About a third of all of our students need remediation when they show up at our colleges and universities. It is our goal, together with our K-12 partners, to make sure that students and families know early what it means to be career and college ready. We were involved in selecting the representatives from higher education who have worked tirelessly with our K-12 partners to see whether or not these standards, one by one, we've looked at those. It's been my position all along that I would take the Council of the Higher Education representatives who have been doing that work as my guidance in moving forward in my vote today. So, you know, I know, having been involved in the political arena for many years before I took this job, I know there's great passion around this, and I'm a great respecter of passion. I'm convinced that higher education has had an important role to play, and I'm grateful for that. And I want to say thanks to everyone who's been involved in doing that, for allowing us to be involved early rather than later.
Thank you, Teresa. Other comments or questions? Yes.
Governor, Superintendent, as the only person on this roundtable and on the state board whose economically viable career is the media, can you all walk me through the decision as to why media literacy is a hard standard across all grades K through 12? My concern is, and I have severe concerns over this being included as a standard. When I look at the definition of a standard, I do not see how media literacy meets that definition that's in the PowerPoint. How do you test? This is a standard. That means we're testing it on son of I-STEP, son of ELA, or whatever's coming down the road. How in the heck do we test this standard in a standardized process? The other question is, I've been in this business 39 years. It has changed rapidly in the last 5 or 6. To me, it is unreasonable to expect teachers in the diverse schools that we have in our state to really understand what media is. When I look at the standards, you're talking about electronic, print, and mass media. There's no mention of internet. There's no mention of all the myriad of ways that media has. So could you all walk me through why this was a standard, because it was never a standard across all 13 grades before? Was anyone in media in Indiana consulted in this? I noticed that you had all these experts in all these different professions. Was anyone in the profession that I have served asked about any of this? Provided advice? We've got some great Hoosier experts in media across our state. Could somebody please walk me through, because I've got real deep concerns about this.
I would be glad to work with Danielle and Molly regarding this question. First, the term media is really, in our last reiterations of standards in language arts, they were embedded within all of our standards. It is talking about, I'm a media specialist, so I'm a librarian working in the classroom. And so with that, it's not about media as your job. It is about media in terms of students utilizing different forms of material and information to actually do their work. So when it says electronic media, it does include the internet. Anything electronic, any type of communication, any type of information that students are gathering, making sure that they are going to be up to date with what's available to them now. So media literacy was not included in the Common Core standards. It was embedded in all of our standards in the past reiteration. And it was determined through the process that we would actually include that to be sure that we were going to make sure that it was a strong emphasis on that as we move forward with our standards. And so with Molly and Danielle, might you want to add to that?
Sure. Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate the distinction of media being a little different
Yes.
than maybe what was understood with the title. And also want to point out in Indiana Academic Standards of 2006, which were our English Language Arts standards, these same content or these knowledge, skills, and abilities around media was actually in our speaking and listening standards. So now they've been pulled out individually because if you think about all the sources our students are bombarded with every single day from all types of resources, they need to be taught how to be critical thinkers. They need to know how to take in information and synthesize and analyze and believe something to be right because of the research behind it, not because they read it on the internet. So this is around the critical thinking skills around information, and these used to be included under speaking and listening. So they are just now pulled out a little bit separately. And Molly or Suji, do you have any comment to
And
that?
I would reiterate that with that distinction, it will not be a standard that will be assessed. All the standards, all of the standards, all of the standards that you see before you are about processing and making sure kids have what they need to know and be able to do. But assessment doesn't actually revolve around every single standard being actually having a question for it. So it's going to be assessed, for instance, I guess give a quick example. When she gave her example of students being able to synthesize information that they've gathered from a source. So they may be presented with a source of information. So we need to be sure that we've given students exposure to gathering sources from information. And when they see that kind of a question on the test, then they'll be able to do that kind of information. But I guess the assessment question, not every single little thing will we have a question for. Will they all be assessed in some manner within language arts? Yes. So I don't know if I'm being clear to you. You look like you're still confused. So can you help me?
Is it, so how then does the teacher at a charter school or a teacher at one of our smaller rural schools understand how media has changed today? In a Washington Township, in a Ben Davis, in some of the other schools in our larger cities, they have media departments, they've got broadcast stuff, they got digital, they got all kind of stuff. But then I'm also concerned about our smaller schools. How will they know the sophistication of how media changed? You made this, instead of embedding it here, there, and everywhere, this thing sticks out like a major standard.
Well,
No disrespect, Madam Superintendent, I was stunned when I got this thing last Monday night. And I'm going, whoa, 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 whoa. And I realized everybody did hard work in putting these together. I mean, no disrespect to all of these teams, but this is my life. And I may not know math, I may not be the greatest at English language, this is something I know about. And it just has hit me not well. And I'm trying to understand.
It's not about preparing students necessarily for your vocation or having all students have access to do a media broadcast, so to speak. It's really about embedding those media skills within how you learn. Did you want to add to
Yeah,
that,
so we were
Danielle?
chatting down here a little bit. So to your, I guess your point about access, two things come to mind. One, our support materials will give examples for the classroom teacher on how they can teach this type of skill. And so if I'm in a charter school or I'm in a school with less access to your point, and again, I agree with the superintendent, we're not talking about media in the same way, but as a classroom teacher, I might bring up a CNN broadcast on the television screen or have it copied onto a VHS tape, if that's my only access, and talk to my students about the critical thinking skills required to listen into that CNN story and decide for myself, if that's a credible source of information. So that's how, again, I think there's support ideas that will follow, and this isn't about every student having a laptop or every student an equal opportunity to resources as you're describing, but rather helping every teacher help every student receive media through a critical thinking lens.
Other questions, comments? Please.
Did that explain it? I think, 39 years in the classroom, been at this a long time to get it happen, sir. Yes. The way my kids get information has changed dramatically. We used to go into the library, and if I was lucky, I got them to look at least 3 books. Now, if I can get them to look at 1 book, I'm lucky. I wanted to get them into something besides Wikipedia. So what we're talking about here is teaching them how to access information in the way that it's changed today, I believe. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. We don't get things like we used to get things. And that's where I think they're going with this. And we, regardless of the school corporation or the size of the school or how much money they have, we have to teach them different ways to go about getting information. And that's what I believe this is.
I get that. You've done a better job understanding it than what was printed down on the media, on the.
Don't take this wrong, that's because where the rubber hits the road is what we do. We understand how you deal with kids day in, day out. No disrespect, that's what we do.
No, I understand that's what you do, and I think the standards need to reflect that simple, basic Hoosier language. Just the-
And that's one of the things that I would like. One of the things I hope we can continue to do, as I've read through, basically I've taught math the last 20 years from 4th to 8th grade level. As I looked at these new standards, what I wanted to find out was, A, are they appropriate? Can my kids handle this? I can look at it, you give me a brand new test, I can tell you the problems kids can't solve, because I know what they understand and how they process at this grade level. When I look at these standards, that's what I was looking for. Can they understand these? Can they handle this? I really appreciate taking something out of 4th grade because they just can't handle that. Mentally, they're not brain developed, ready to handle some of that stuff. And if we give it to them, now we've really made a mess because they're confused for years to come on that. We've got to make sure that's right. I would like to see us continue to move the standards language so that when my parent who didn't graduate from high school but wants their kid to have a better life looks at this, they can understand what it means. Common Core didn't have that. These standards, and keep in mind I've been an official for 40 years, so I don't care if you like what I say or not. I've been called a lot of names. I want these things kids, don't tell media please. These people understand what we're talking about now. That's what I want to do. Kids to understand and parents to understand what we're talking about doing. My kids can handle the standards that are here. My 4th and 5th through 6th graders can handle that. That's why I like these much better, and I don't think they're Common Core. I really don't.
There's some more hands.
Yes, please.
Through the chairs to Danielle or Molly, in the glossary that you mentioned earlier, is this something where the definition of media for others, I agree with Danny, I mean, we know what that is, but so that everybody is clear, is the glossary a good place to clear that
That's
up?
a great
perhaps?
place, absolutely, thank you. It's a
Okay.
great idea.
And may I ask another?
Yes, please.
Okay. On the survey that you mentioned to guide the resources that are available, could you tell me where that survey is available? Is it through the dialogue, the daily
came out through-
dialogue, or through the Learning Connection? Or I want to go back and make sure that we help get folks to look at that.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, it was actually through the dialogue last Monday. So the audience was teachers, school leaders, corporation leaders, literacy coaches, and so forth. If you think it would be helpful to also link it on the Learning Connection, we'd be happy to do so. Again, we just want to get as much broad input to support the implementation as possible.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Stacy.
Thank you, Governor. Would you go back to slide 20, please? It was about standards and the definition of a standard.
Okay. Stop me when I get there, because I don't have my numbers in front of me here.
It says, what did the Indiana experts do at the top?
Sure. I think I know where you're headed.
It was very important for me to call your attention to something that's been bothersome throughout the discussion of the Common Core state standards. not only at a national level, but also at a state level. And I don't think that our teachers have this misunderstanding, but I feel that it's really important that we explain the difference between a standard and the curriculum. And I appreciate your explanation, and I agree with your explanation. You're spot on. So I tried to figure out how could I explain this to my 85-year-old grandfather who is functionally literate. And I said, Papa, it's like this. An outcome or a standard is you need to cut the grass. The curriculum is how you're going to do it. Are you going to use a push mower, a lawnmower, or a tractor? So I know that's a very basic, down, dirty, kind of ugly definition, but if you could put your mind around that definition or explanation, that will help you understand the difference between the standard and the curriculum. I don't want the state telling me how to teach my kids in school. I want my teachers to do it because they'll own the process, they'll buy into it, they believe in it. So I appreciate that the standards don't tell us how to teach, tell us kind of what to teach and what the outcomes are, but not how to do it. So let me choose my lawnmower or my lawn tractor, whatever. But I just want to bring that out. I think it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. And I think that's going to be a very important step in our implementation, is to continue to reiterate these differences, because I do think that, I agree with you, this has been one of the biggest misconceptions, misunderstandings, and frankly, the fueling of so much just passionate disagreement around this work. So we intend to continue to message that.
Other questions, comments? Yes, please, Wendy.
I read through all of the information that was sent to us, plus obviously people in our district have poured over the standards when they were first posted, attended meetings, and offered comments. And I just have to say that one of the things that confuses me about this whole conversation is, as a lifelong educator, that people want to simplify something that really is very complex. I think one of the things that we are charged with as educators in this complex world is to teach children to think. And I think back in the day when I was a child, we did a lot by rote because none of us really realized the world would change this fast. I think that something that we're forgetting, and I appreciate Stacy bringing up the fact, we start with standards. And being very honest, we can argue about the standards, but what's more important is the curriculum and the instruction that we wrap around the standards, because individual districts have to adopt that and develop that. The part that very much concerns me, and I think we're just skipping over it, will be the assessments that we attach to the standards, because that's what people in the state should be concerned about. And I'll say that because we as a state have adopted an accountability structure that takes standards and tests them, and in the case of ISTEP, uses that one test to make lots of determinations about individual students, about teachers, about schools, about school districts. So I hope we don't get stuck on which standards we adopt, because I think that while I am a very proud Hoosier, I think that part of what we get criticized for, and I thought all of this started back in 1900 with the fact that we're out of step with the rest of the world, and that there's no way to really compare us across the country. So I can be very proud of the standards too, but I hope we don't put ourselves in a box that at the end of the day, our children are not all going to stay in Indiana. And it is important for you to be able to know, have we given our students the ability to think, not to do rote, but to be able to synthesize information, to be able to problem solve. When we're talking about that conversation about media, it isn't whether they understand media today, it's whether they're going to understand what to do with the media 20 years from now when they're grown-ups and not in the school system. So my whole point today is to be concerned about what assessments we're going to attach. And Governor, Superintendent, I hope we're also going to use this as an opportunity to start really stepping back and looking at what is our accountability structure. These are so critical. People are taking sides over these standards because the end result is now so important. So I hope we go past this. I know we're not going to get a chance to talk about standards and assessments today, but I'm more concerned about that, being very honest with you, than I am about these standards. Because being honest with you, I'm a lifelong educator. I had to reread them. But I had to reread the ones in 2000. We're acting as if these are so different from the ones we adopted in 2000 and 2009. If we took a test, very few people would have been able to understand the ones in 2000 either. So I just don't want us to lose track of the whole point, that educators are the ones that are going to have to develop the curriculum and instruction, working with the state school superintendent. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Patrick O'Rourke.
Thank you, Governor. I just finished a book, A Great Debate. And actually, in preparation for this meeting, I did not read the standards. I didn't do a whole lot of thinking about this particular issue. I've been on the round table about 12 years now, and I've heard presentation after presentation after presentation on standards. In fact, I think I may have either made the motion or seconded the motion when Governor Daniels was here with Tony Bennett, Indiana adopting the Common Core standards. Now, I joke about the fact that I'm from Lake County, Indiana, therefore on my birth certificate is the term Democrat, and you have no choice. So this is not a political thing for me at all. The Great Debate is a conversation about Thomas Paine and Edmund Burke. And it really goes to the heart of what's going on in America today, which is this division, federalism, state government, national government. And what disturbs me a little bit, I must be frank and honest, is that this has taken a turn in this state along political lines or ideology. I greatly respect the work that Governor Pence is doing in this state, and I respect you, Governor, and certainly Superintendent Ritz, two different parties, both working for the same thing, what is in the best interest of the kids in this state. In Hammond, Indiana, where I'm from, we have spent over $630,000 in the last 2.5 years on staff development, looking forward to implement the Common Core standards. We've had workshops after workshops after workshops where every single Hammond teacher has gone through a myriad of exercises preparing themselves for these standards. We've developed an assessment methodology for teachers that is predicated on, if not exactly the Common Core standards, not far from it. Now, having said that, these are great standards. They are great standards. And I was here when Mr. Cohen made the presentation about the Common Core standards. I was here when Governor Daniels and Tony Bennett spoke highly of the governor of the standards. And I thought a consensus had been reached in this state around that issue. It's changed. And that consensus has now resulted in the General Assembly and the Governor's Office and the State Department developing new standards. They are wonderful standards. What I worry about, frankly, I attended the International Summit on Education Reform recently in New York City about a year ago. Got into a conversation with teachers from Finland and Singapore and Hong Kong and Germany, Canada, where they do have national standards. And it makes it difficult for the United States of America to be compared to other nations around the world when the standards could be different in all 50 states. I also worry about one more concept, the diversity of our students, and the notion that in Hammond, Indiana, every single one of our schools next year is going to be a Title I school, all of them. We've reached that level in terms of poverty. The lack of equity in terms of technology is really going to harm our kids. The other thing I'm worried about has to do with assessments. I agree with Wendy from Fort Wayne. It is actually far more important to me as an educator and as some sort of a political leader in the AFT that we develop sophisticated assessment methodology compatible with the standards, the curriculum and the pedagogy follows, and that's going to take time. So I like to make a recommendation. I don't have the authority, I guess, to make it in terms of a motion, but I guess if I could wave a magic wand, I love to see us promulgate these standards for a year, educate teachers and community members for a year and take a deep breath, and in that year, develop the assessments that'll be totally compatible with these standards. I'd rather do it a little slower and maybe a little smarter rather than fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Bill Stanskiewicz.
Thank you, Governor, and I'd like to direct my question to Madam Chair Superintendent Ritz. In addition to being invited to serve on Indiana's Education Roundtable, I also have been elected to serve on my local school board. I've always said since joining school board, I'm glad the local grocery store is open 24 hours. I can do my shopping at 1 and 2 in the morning. Usually, the concerns I hear, though, is that somebody didn't make the soccer team or didn't get the lead in the play or something like that. I will say, as a member of my local school board and a member of the roundtable, how grateful I am with a couple of hundred emails that I've received from people around the state leading up to this meeting, and that it was neat that the concern is about what's happening in the classroom and not necessarily who the soccer coach is. So I certainly appreciate the input from our neighbors from across the state. As a member of my local school board, we have an opportunity. We hire the teachers. My signature goes on that contract. We actually have final say over the textbooks. In fact, at our most recent school board meeting a week ago today, we just adopted some new textbooks. And the way that process works is our faculty are gathered into committees. Those committees have faculty chairs. As faculty members, they bring in their expertise and their experience. Fortunately, in our school district, parents are invited to be part of that process. And then they make a presentation to the school board, and we ask them questions. And we are able to decide as school board members if those are the textbooks for our district. Interestingly, just last week, I mentioned my role as an Education Roundtable member and asked our faculty at our school district, knowing that this was coming up today and the subsequent meeting next week of the State Board of Ed, if we're making a 5 or 6 year commitment on textbooks, would we be locking ourselves into something that might not be compliant with new standards? And our faculty said that they had looked at the proposed standards and that the textbooks that they were recommending were suitable whether or not these standards were adopted or not, that they certainly are strong, but that we'd be able to adapt either way. So that was encouraging to hear. Other decisions we've been able to make locally, should we have one-to-one laptops or not? And different school districts have had different ideas on how to make up all these snow days, a decision I hope you never have to make again, and we join you in that. But some have added days to the end of the school year. Some have added Saturday time. In my district, we've had e-learning days added, and we were grateful for that waiver to be able to do so. But the bottom line was, each local school district was able to propose an idea to you to say, is this consistent with meeting all these state standards? So my question to you then is, and if you need to delegate that, I certainly understand. You have good people working with and alongside you. How much of that local control will be lost if these standards are adopted? Will our faculty committee still be able to meet and look at curriculum? Will they be able to still determine textbooks? Will they still be able to come to me as a school board member with their recommendation on how much technology or not should be in our school district? What we should do in terms of days that need to be made up or not? Because I ran for school board because I believe so passionately in local control and do not want to give that up if these standards prevent us from doing so.
There will be no loss of local control as a result of adopting these standards. And I will go further and make a commitment to you that I am committed to making sure that the Department of Education is going to assist locals in however they might need our assistance in making your decisions. So yes, I believe totally in local control. I know the governor does as well. The standards are adopted at the state level, but everything else is local control. And your curriculum, your design, your resources are totally your decisions in your communities. And with that, we will provide support and resources that you may want to access. We certainly want to be sure that we're doing our utmost to support your local decisions.
Thank you for that reassurance, and any help you can provide on the soccer coach question.
You're on your own for that.
Dean Vic Lechtenberg. You want to pass the microphone down? Kevin, can you pass down a mic? There, this one's.
Here's one. Here you go.
Yeah, okay. So I have a comment and a question, and I want to particularly compliment the team that has put together the standards for the individual math core standards, Governor, that you mentioned. I think that goes beyond, as I understand, Common Core, and is a very, very important step in college readiness particularly. And I can tell you numerous examples of young men and women that came to Purdue University thinking they had the advanced mathematics or calculus or pre-calculus courses that qualified them for the next level, only to find that their preparation wasn't anywhere near as rigorous as it needed to be. So this is an important step. In that regard, I note in the Achieve assessment that there's a reference to a number of expectations that appear in the 2009 standards for all students, this is with respect to mathematics, that are now incorporated into elective courses, raising questions as to whether students who meet but don't exceed the course-taking requirements for a high school diploma will have the preparation they need for post-secondary. Is this something I should be worried about?
I'm going to let Danielle address that because we received that same comment.
We received that same comment, and we went ahead and made that edit. So again, working with Achieve and other national reviewers has continued to evolve. So we took that edit and we made sure we made the changes they were recommending. Those along with most every single other recommendation they made.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that okay? Is that responsive? Thank you, Dean. Steve Baker.
Thank you. I do want to commend the Department of Ed and CECI and the Governor's Office for the process. Principal at Bluffton High School in Bluffton, Indiana, education. I've been part of my life, been an educator for 29 years, administrator 18. I've appreciated the process. I've attended the state board meetings. I have worked with the Department of Ed, I've worked with CECI, and I believe the process is good. So I thank you for that. I also work very closely with the Indiana Association of School Principals, and because of that, I get to travel all over the state, and I get to talk to principals. In fact, I will be in Kokomo on Thursday. I will be in Plymouth on Friday. I was in Evansville not too long ago, and I get to talk to principals. And here's what I am hearing. Principals across the state of Indiana, I cannot speak for everyone, but the ones I have talked to say the standards are good, the standards are solid, let's move on, we're ready to go. I also took the standards to my own English department. Now again, we're a small school district, but we're an A school district, so I believe in my educators, I believe in my teachers. I gave them the standards very early on and I said, tear into them. We did it together, and you can tell they are teachers because of the highlight and the sticky notes. And the teachers are solid. The teachers appreciate the process. They are ready to move forward. So I want you to know that coming from Bluffton, Indiana. What I want to repeat, because I think it bears repeating, is what Dr. Robinson said, because I respect her position, but I want to make sure this is clear. What we do from here is the key. I believe, I'll say it again, the standards are solid, but that doesn't matter if the professional development isn't there, the assessments are not directly related. If educators literally aren't at the same table as Department of Ed, CECI, working with everyone, creating those assessments, creating those resources to be part of that team, we want to be part of that. We are offering our services for that. That rollout, that transition is critical. And that's what I'm hearing from educators. Good. Now what's going to happen is what I think a lot of people will be watching and waiting for. I'm kind of hearing that all throughout here today. It has to be clear. I know we talk about examples. Examples certainly do not run the standards, but here's what a veteran teacher told me, and I loved it. If a new teacher is coming in, now we have to provide professional development, we get that, but if they were to read these standards, would they clearly understand what needs to be taught based upon the curriculum and everything else? So we need to make sure that those things are clear through examples, through resources, through guides. Professional development will be key, absolutely key. And again, I am offering Indiana Association, I'm not putting in a plug, but IESP wants to be part of that process. We've been part of that process. We think it's been a good process. From here on, I think people will be watching us because I'm also serving with Superintendent Ritz on the A to F accountability model panel, and we will be held to task on what that grade looks like based upon the assessments. We have to get it right. So thank you for the process. We're ready to move forward. We're ready to roll out the transition. We want to be part of it, and we're ready to get about the business of implementing the new standards.
Steve, thank you. And as Dan Clark pointed out earlier, you all have an April 18 letter in your packets from the Indiana Association of School Principals supporting this final draft of new standards that I recommend to your attention. But Steve, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Senator Rogers.
Thank you, Governor and Superintendent Ritz. I've been involved with this process probably longer than anyone else at this table and longer than most people in the legislature. This is my 32nd year. I just announced to Pat Kyle it might be time for both of us to leave. Right, but one of the things I've always been grateful for, is, at least as the legislature is concerned, is our ability to come back together and move forward. And that's what I'm hoping that this process will be. I was an advocate for Common Core, and I don't apologize for that. I believe that some of the things that Pat O'Rourke had to say in terms of us needing to have a curriculum where, especially since I live in a border county and we get a lot of young people from Illinois, and they come in from Illinois, and if they don't have the same standards we do, I think it sets us back, but I won't even go into that. What I want to say is, at this point in time, where are we? I think that any criticisms in terms of the process that was used is absolutely unfounded. I think when the governor said that we had subject matter expertise and we had teaching experience, I think those are the main two ingredients for what we do when we put standards together. I was there with the first standards. I started out with Governor Orr with A+. When we first got started with school reform. But one of the things we were able to then is to sit down at the table and come to some agreement. You can't win it all, you know? Maybe I've been here too long, maybe I've been too satisfied with half a loaf. But I know that in getting half a loaf, somebody else has a half or parts of it, and everybody has had input. And when I listen to the reactions of the people that are in the audience, and I listen to those of us that are trying to move forward, I'm hoping that at the end of this process, if we come together and say that these are the standards that are for Indiana, I'm hoping that everybody will get on board, support the standards, because we need that kind of support in our schools and among our young people. We need for them to feel as though we are all moving in the same direction. And so I'd like to thank the people in charge of the process that put it together. Great. I don't think there is anything that we need to do there, but I hope that when we leave this meeting today, Governor and Superintendent, that we're all on the same page in terms of making this work for Indiana. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Senator. Other comments or questions? Dean Lechtenberg, if I could come back to you, Pat, I'll come right to you in a second. You didn't have much amplification on your microphone before. I want to make sure I want to make sure the record was accurate. You indicated that the additional mathematics standards in these new standards over and above what was in the Indiana Common Core was important from your perspective at Purdue University.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of college readiness, college preparedness. I did want to make sure we heard you right. I'm going to go to Pat unless I see somebody that hasn't spoken before.
I'd like to make a comment.
Great. He'll defer to you, Pat, and then Sergio, you're next.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Governor. I want to ape what Earlene Rogers, my friend from Gary, just said. I've known Senator Rogers for, do I dare say it, about 75 years. But we've known each other a long time.
I don't think so.
And I know that Senator Rogers is very consensus-orientated, that her whole career in the state Senate has trying to bring people together. And I respect that enormously. I intend to vote for the standards. I did not want any misrepresentation that because I gave a little spiel about the history did not mean I didn't think these were very strong standards. But I do want to just add one more caveat to make the point If I'm the only person who thinks this, fine. I really do think we need a year, not a moratorium, a year plan to work this out in terms of staff development, curriculum alignment, assessment, that I think this will all come together in a very, very meaningful way. I just want to make that point one more time, then I can sleep tonight.
Pat, I think it's a very good point, and Superintendent
Yeah,
wanted to speak to the process.
I just want to make sure to clarify that our new assessments will not be in effect until 15-16. So we will have all next year to really start to get them, you know, in place before we have assessments that really start.
That's an excellent point. Sergio Aguilar.
Thank you. I have been a member of this roundtable for 7 or 8 years, and this is the first time that I have experienced a great number of emails and communications from all corners of the state and the city expressing concerns and about the core, not the new standards that are being proposed. And I have a big concern and a question for the people that work on this, which I'm sure work very hard, is why is it that standards that were prepared before Common Core, which have been praised all over the place, which have been taken as example of good standards in the United States and in other places, and were never implemented, are not something that is not something that could. Sorry, it's not something that could be used and that teachers already know, and they are very good, valid standards that could be served well the children of the state, which is really the objective that everybody is looking for here. That's one comment. The other one is I'm a little bit concerned that I am an adopted Hoosier. I am not originally from this land, but I now feel like a Hoosier. I'm always accused now by many people of being employed by the Chamber of Commerce because I always speak highly of what I think about Indiana and Indianapolis and the values. But I don't think that we really need to be parochial. We live in a very wide world, and people are moving around and getting influences from all over. People from Indiana do business with the rest of the world, and thinking that only the things that Indiana or people from Indiana can make are good is not a good methodology for me. I would like to think that we would like to prepare students in our colleges and our schools as citizens of the world, which is what we really need to be in order to be successful from here onward. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that we can adopt things that are being made in other places that could serve us well and use them because they serve us well, instead of saying only the things that we can do are good or trustworthy. Those are my 2 comments, and on the first one I would like perhaps a comment about why not the pre-Common Core standards.
Thank you, Sergio. Let's give that to the panel.
Sure, absolutely, and I do think there's probably people on the panel here who would like to speak to this as well as I would. I think we would be remiss had we not looked at a variety of sources of standards. So to your point, we agree with you. My slide showcased the fact that the Indiana academic standards of 2000, 2009, and 2006 were rated an A. But I also think, as Commissioner Lubbers and the governor and Sam here can attest to, those were taught in our classrooms, and then we still had a high epidemic of students going to college with a need of remediation. So if we had just turned back the clock and said, these are college and career, we don't think we would have been doing a service to the process which we described, which is making sure we have college and career ready standards that are the strongest, the clearest, and with the highest level of rigor. So I think we did agree with you. They were strong. There was a lot of standards that remain in this final draft, which have a lot of, I guess, foundation in the Indiana academic standards of old, but we continue to improve upon them. Anybody else want to?
I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to listen to the sound of my own voice for a moment. I wanted to just sort of point out there's a tension in sort of your two comments, right? That on the one hand, there is this question about why can't we go back and be more parochial and use our old standards, and on the other hand, a stated belief in sort of a more cosmopolitan orientation to the world, and seeing people as citizens of the world. And I would say, for my part, that I don't believe that the previous standards prepared Hoosier students to be citizens of the world. I'm not 100% sure that they prepared them to be students at 4- and 2-year institutions of higher education in Indiana, and I'm not sure that they prepared students for entry-level work after high school if they chose to go a different route than college. But I think all of us who have been involved in this process saw a value in certain elements of those standards. That's why they've been incorporated. That's why they were reviewed. But ultimately, they weren't sufficient for what we expect our students to be able to do both now and going forward.
Sam, you might identify yourself too, since you didn't speak before.
Sorry, I'm Sam Sneidman. I'm Director of Readiness and Alignment with the Commission for Higher Education.
Thank you. Other members of the panel want to speak to that or no? Very, very excellent comments, Sergio. Let me point out, by some estimates under the prior standards, we had 10,000 students who went from high school to Indiana colleges and universities that required remediation at that college or university before they could begin their academic career at that institution. And that was under the prior standards. So there was the standards that you referred to, the 2000, 2009, and elsewhere, were drawn into this process because they were widely praised for many reasons. But there was members of the board here should know that there was a sincere effort to improve upon those prior standards, and believe that's reflected in the draft that's before you today. Other questions or comments? Okay. I want to thank all the members for their participation in that discussion. Now would ask Superintendent Ritz to bring forward the resolutions if there's no further questions. Is there a motion regarding the proposed English language standards?
Yes, it was so moved and it was seconded, and so I believe we're ready for the vote.
Dan, please call the roll for the vote.
Mr. Aguilera?
Abstain.
Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bland?
He's gone.
Mr. Brown?
No.
Representative Baining?
Keep order, please. He said yes.
Yes. Representative Baining? Mr. Brenniger?
Yes.
Mr. Dwyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hubbard?
Yes.
Dr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Hurst?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mayor Hurst? Mr. Kiley?
Yes.
Senator Cruz?
No.
Mr. Lechtenberg? Mr. Lechtenberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubbers?
Yes.
Mrs. Meredith?
Yes.
Mr. O'Rourke?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Senator Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Sanders?
Yes.
Mr. Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Stanzakavich?
Yes.
Mr. Tebby?
Yes.
Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Motion carries. No, I'm sorry. Superintendent Ritz?
Yes.
And Governor Pence?
Yes.
Two to 21 to 2.
21, yes. 2 no's, and abstain.
The chair recognizes there are 21 yes votes, 2 no votes, and 1 abstention. And with that, the motion to adopt the English Language Arts standard is carried.
There's also been a motion to approve the Indiana Academic Standards for Mathematics 2014, and it's been seconded.
Dan, would you call the roll?
Mr. Aguilera?
No?
Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bland, did Dennis leave? Mr. Brown?
No.
Representative Baining?
Yes.
Mr. Brenniger?
Yes.
Mr. Dwyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hubbard?
Yes.
Dr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mayor Hurst?
Yes.
Mr. Kiley?
Yes.
Senator Cruz?
No.
Mr. Lechtenberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubbers?
Yes.
Mrs. Meredith?
Yes.
Mr. O'Rourke?
Yes.
Superintendent Robinson?
Yes.
Senator Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Sanders?
Yes.
Actually, Commissioner Sanders. Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Stanzakavich?
Yes.
Mr. Tebby?
Yes.
Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes.
Governor Pence?
Yes. The vote is 21 yes, 3 no. The motion to adopt the proposed math standards is carried. With that, let me say this group will be meeting again soon. Oh, I'm sorry, there was a third resolution from the amended, agenda, a resolution regarding exemplary curricular and instructional materials aligned with Indiana's academic standards. Is there further discussion?
Kevin Brenniger, did you want to make the motion?
Yes, I would be happy to make the motion that we adopt this secondary resolution.
All right, do I have a second?
It's moved, seconded.
So,
Kevin's recognized for a comment on the
Thank you.
resolution.
Having adopted or have recommended to the state board the English language arts and math standards, I offer this resolution to supplement those standards with a focus on a belief that I have, and I think some of the other business and hopefully all the roundtable members would see that teachers, administrators, and school boards would benefit from recommendations from content specialists regarding exemplary curricular and instructional materials, sample math problems, samples of grade level text complexity, et cetera. The resolution also emphasizes that IC 2026-12-24 puts the authority for determining curriculum in the hands of local school boards, so these would be voluntary. Recommended items wouldn't be mandatory in any respect, and also says what I believe is the case is that for the roundtable to fulfill its statutory obligations regarding recommendation of assessments aligned with our standards, that we could benefit from standard resource guides, and then asked that the department, as it develops these materials, bring these back to the roundtable and ultimately state board no later than June 15th, and that we also have an annual review or discussion of these materials as they're updated and supplemented
each year over time.
Is there any discussions, questions? Dr. Hughes?
My question for Superintendent Ritz is, how different is this resolution from what you would have done regardless or without this resolution?
The department is always committed to actually putting out great resources for teachers to be able to utilize and local decisions to be made. So what I think it's doing is sending a very strong message that we're committed to that. It's more of a commitment statement, I believe. Also, we want to be sure, as Steve mentioned, that we have lots of things embedded in there to be sure that everybody understands what it is that they're teaching. And so, and then they can go about how to teach it and develop their curriculum. We just want to be sure that we're making a strong commitment to that.
Okay, and what about the deadline?
We are doable with the deadlines. They are deadlines that we self-imposed upon ourselves already, so we're okay with that.
Other questions or discussion on the motion? Wendy?
I just had the same question around the deadlines. And I would also probably add that if we're going to, it's what you are going to do anyway, but the deadline worried me, and that maybe we need a little bit more time to have conversations in our communities, have conversations at the board level about what just happened today and what's going to happen at the roundtable. But if you think it's doable, that
So
was my
Kevin,
only concern.
If I understand the resolution, from my perspective in reading it, this is really an ongoing process. The
Yes.
initial set will be ready by July, and then going forward,
added
it
to,
just
and
keeps
we'll come back
revolving,
once a
because we'll
year
be
and look
talking to educators and gathering more resources and input. It's an ever-evolving kind of process, but our first initial reiteration of that would be available then.
Exactly.
And we're committed to that.
That's the intent of the resolution.
Other questions or discussion on the motion? Please.
Just on behalf of the teachers, I would encourage the superintendent to, shortly after the school year begins, begin to collect that input, because I know we'll be spending June and part of July before our classrooms open up again in the fall or late summer getting ready. And so we will probably have input to offer pretty quickly.
Yes, and we're going to have some surveys pretty quickly.
Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Dan, call the roll.
Mr. Aguilera? Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Representative Baining?
Yes.
Mr. Brenniger?
Yes.
Mr. Dwyer? Mr. Hubbard?
Yes.
Dr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mayor Hurst?
Yes.
Mr. Kiley?
Yes.
Senator Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Lechtenberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Lovers?
Yes.
Mrs. Meredith?
Yes.
Mr. O'Rourke?
Yes.
Superintendent Robinson?
Yes.
Senator Rogers? Commissioner Sanders?
Yes.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Stanzikavich?
Yes.
Mr. Tebby?
Yes.
Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes.
And Governor Pence?
Yes. The count is 24 in favor, none against, and the resolution is adopted.
I know, I did better than the state.
With that, having no further business before the roundtable, a few closing remarks of appreciation. First and foremost, allow me to commend Superintendent Ritz, the Department of Education, the dedicated staff at the Center for Education and Career Innovation in our office, and all of those so well represented today by Danielle Shockey, Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Education, and Dr. Molly Chamberlain, Chief Assessment and Accountability Office with the Center for Education and Career Innovation, for your the countless hours that you put into this effort, bringing us to this important juncture today. We are grateful on this panel for your service to the people of Indiana, and express that to you from our hearts. I'm also grateful to Suji Shin from the Center on Standards and Assessment Implementation for her yeoman's work in assisting Indiana through this process. And Sam Snyderman, we appreciate you being here with the Commission, and appreciate Teresa, the Commission on Higher Education's direct engagement I think you said earlier today, for the first time ever, in the development of standards for the schools of Indiana, and we commend you for that. I wish to thank all the members of the roundtable for your thoughtful participation leading up to this consideration of these motions today. These standards will now go to the Indiana State Board of Education for approval over the next week, but we will carry your recommendation to the board and are grateful for your participation. Let me also say as I close how grateful I am to the classroom teachers, to the faculty at our universities and colleges, to the thousands of dedicated Hoosiers who participated in this process. It is accurate to say that never before in our state's history have we embarked upon an effort to develop standards in such an inclusive and thoughtful way. And I'm personally grateful for the participation of every single Hoosier who cares enough and cared so much about our kids to be involved in this process. With today's vote, we've again said no to Common Core. We've withdrawn from a national testing consortium. We've withdrawn from a national testing consortium, and we've said yes to high Indiana standards for this generation and the next. I'm genuinely grateful to every Hoosier who participated in this process, and especially those who insisted we could do better than Common Core and initiated this reconsideration of Indiana's posture over the last 2 years. Adopting new standards, though, let me remind everyone present, as Wendy Robinson said so eloquently, adopting new standards is just the beginning. Now, parents and communities need to begin the hard work with their local school districts where critical decisions about curriculum and textbook selection will occur. We need to be vigilant in making decisions the Indiana way to ensure quality and content of education taking place in our classrooms. And of course, the important work of the state assessment that Steve Baker and others have talked about today will go forward apace. As I close today, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all those that have participated in this process and brought us to this point. Because of the hard work of our educators and parents, Indiana is leading the way on state academic standards that will challenge our students, guide our teachers, and give parents the confidence that our Indiana standards reflect the high expectations Hoosiers have for all of our schools. So help us God. With that, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Chair, the ayes have it. We are adjourned, and I thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm like,